Hi, Christian Yordanov here. Today I'm going to go over one fasting study just to give you a little bit of the nuance so you can see there's actually a lot of deleterious effects from fasting, but the researchers aren't looking for those, so you have to take a little bit more of a nuanced approach when like looking at the papers. And then because there's so few markers each study can really test because of limitations and constraints, that we have to really look at a lot of different studies to kind of get the nuances and weave together a little bit of a tapestry of actually what are the negative effects of fasting that almost always are kind of overlooked. They're not given enough attention, if any. Just so you're aware that it's not all rainbows, unicorns, and autophagy when you fast. Okay, a lot of bad stuff happens. And what I'm gonna do is over the next weeks and maybe months, as I'm writing my book on fasting, I'm gonna be sharing insights like this. So what I will recommend to you, I'm going to have a video where the study will be on screen, and in this particular one there's some charts and stuff from the paper that would be useful for you to see. So the link will be in the podcast description. Follow that to see the stuff again. It would really help you kind of visualize some of the stuff. Now I'm gonna sort of talk you through everything anyway, so if you're on the podcast player, you will still get a ton of value from this, but it would help even at a later point if you just click the link below and go to my YouTube channel and subscribe there, because you know how they say a picture paints 1,000 words. If you're already on the video, I'm sorry to waste your time. Let's get right into it. So the paper is titled, "Is Muscle and Protein Loss Relevant in Long-Term Fasting in Healthy Men? A Prospective Trial on Physiological Adaptations," in the Journal of Cachexia, Sarcopenia, and Muscle, published in 2021. And in terms of what they were looking at, they got a decent result, right? So, but again, you have to, this is where the nuance sort of comes into play. Let's say a paper, a study are looking for improvements in cardiometabolic markers or weight loss. That's usually what they look at with these studies. They can report good results, but if we look at what markers they were reporting, we can actually see, even though they thought they got good results in terms of what they were looking for, their outcomes and endpoints, there's stuff in there that we can glean that helps us to build, again, this tapestry of what actually happens when a person fasts, right? Because, again, in the mainstream, it's like, and alternative mainstream, oh, you just start burning all the fat, and then you get into autophagy, and then you just rejuvenate, and like these miraculous things happen, and that's honestly, that's bullshit. So let's get into it. So this was a trial, 16 healthy men, average 44 years plus minus 14 years. So there was guys that were 30, guys that were 58. So in that sort of range. So so some of these guys were pretty young to begin with. Now here's the other thing. This was a quote unquote fasting study, but they did it using the Buchinger Wilhelmi protocol, okay? Which Buchinger, he was like a pioneer in the fasting sort of space. There's a couple of clinics that they have, but this protocol allows for about, depending on the paper, on the study, between 200 and 400 calories per day. So in this case, they were getting a supplement of basically juice, broth, and like vegetable soup or whatever. That gave them about 200 to 250 calories a day. So here already, if you just factor this in, this is not a true like water only fast. So because they were getting some calories mostly from carbohydrate, this already has a huge muscle and lean tissue sparing effect. And remember that the paper is examining, is muscle and protein loss relevant in long-term fasting. So this already is a little bit screwy, let's just say, because you might, let's say, or your doctor or like a practitioner, health coach, influencer, they might kind of glance at the study and be like, hey, look, they said it's not a big issue, after 4 days it's gonna be fine after 4 days because you enter into ketosis, and lean tissue is spared, protein is spared at that point. But if you then listen to that influencer, and then you go on a water fast, and you don't do this protocol where you get some, carbs in the morning, some carbs at night to spare, to reduce some of the stress on your body, then you're gonna kind of hurt yourself, if that makes sense. So what were the results? So the 10-day fast decreased body weight by 7%. Okay, so on average they lost 5.9 kilograms, and I'll quickly do the math for you here. That is 5.9 times 2.2 equals about, let's say, almost 13 pounds of weight. And look at the next statement here. And basal metabolic rate was reduced by 12%. So the amount of kind of calories they burn, their basal metabolic rate was reduced by 12%. Now, fat mass and lean soft tissues accounted for 40 and 60% of the weight loss. What does that mean? So fat mass, so 12.98, or I'll do more simply. Let's say 13 pounds or 5.9 kilograms times 0.4. So they lost about 5.2 pounds of fat, right? 40% of the 13 pounds. That's about 5.2 pounds of fat during 10 days. Okay, so if we divide 5.2 divided by 10, that is about, they lost half a pound of fat a day. Okay, so you have to ask yourself, is that the juice worth the squeeze? And at first glance, it's like, oh wow, half a pound of fat per day, like 225 grams of fat loss per day. That sounds like pretty amazing. However, you gotta kind of starve yourself. You're gonna suffer. And these guys, remember, they were in a center where they get a lot of pampering, right? They're away from the stress of life, and like in these centers, they don't let them have their phone in the communal areas, and like they have a curfew type thing where you have to be in your room and resting, and like you can't just fast for 10 days with a normal like life and stuff. Like if you have kids and a job, and like you need time away, right? So you gotta spend money, like thousands, to be in a center to get this half a pound a day. However, even if, let's say, you said, okay, the juice is worth the squeeze, what's the other cost? So the 60% of the other weight loss, that was lean soft tissues, that was 44% of that was extracellular water, they estimated, right? Some of this stuff is not very super accurate, and it's not perfect, but we just kind of, let's just roll with it for now. So the other 14% was muscle and liver glycogen and water that's associated with it, and then 42% was metabolic active lean tissue, as they call it. So let's do the math quickly. So again, 13 pounds, it's 12.98, but let's just say 13 pounds times 0.6. So that's all the 60% of lean soft tissues lost. So of that, so we're going to times 7.8 by, sorry if I'm blowing your sort of eardrums with nonsense math. I hate math too. So times 0.42. This is like the most advanced math I can do, so that's 3.27 pounds of lean soft lean metabolic active lean tissue that they lost. And what do they characterize as metabolic active lean tissue? It would be muscle and organs like the liver and the intestine. So and actually bone is, actually technically has a lot of protein in there that can be catabolized, but they assumed that bone wasn't affected. So think about it like this. Let's just put it this way. Is 5.2 pounds of fat loss in 10 days worth losing 3.27 pounds of your organs and your muscles and the collagen in maybe your skin and your joints getting degenerated and your bones getting degenerated? Is it worth it? Because to me it looks like it's not one-to-one, but here's why it's not one-to-one. It's because they had 200, and the math here is 250 calories divided by roughly 4, about 62 grams of carbs, let's say 60 grams of carbs a day, added supplement. What does that mean? Well, if they had removed that, if that wasn't a part of the protocol, this Buckinger protocol, that means these folks not getting these 60 or 62 grams of carbs a day, they would have probably further degenerated their lean tissues. And when you kind of look at it, basically protein to glucose conversion has about a 50% efficiency, which means, let's say you catabolize 100 grams of protein in your body, or from meat that you ate, let's say, whatever. You're gonna make from 100 grams of protein, not meat, but the protein portion of that meat, or your own meat, you're gonna make 50 grams of glucose. So very, very, very degenerative, very expensive, and inefficient. And remember, and if you've ever tried to put on muscle, you know, especially older people, women, like kind of more stressed people, you know how hard it is to put on muscle. So to think that you're just gonna quote unquote build back better in the next few months and just regain all that muscle and especially this other lean tissue, like in your joints and your skin and your bones, that is a pipe dream. So again, you have to ask yourself, is the 5.2 pounds of fat loss worth the 3 point whatever it was 27 of metabolic organs and metabolic active lean tissue? Is it worth it? I would posit that it's not. And these guys were lucky that they had this Buckinger sort of protocol supplement of extra some carbohydrates that would spare the further degeneration. Okay, so what did they conclude? A 10-day fast appears safe in healthy humans. So they're like looking at protein loss. So they're like, protein loss occurs in early fast, but decreases as ketogenesis increases. Fasting combined with physical activity does not negatively impact muscle function. And that's kind of all they were looking for. It wasn't like they weren't looking to prove fasting is amazing, or they have very specific sort of thing about protein loss here. So let's look at it a little bit. Like, let's look at what they actually did. So they did first of all, they did the study at the Buckinger Wilhelmi Clinic in Überlingen, Germany, Deutschland. Überlingen. Which I haven't looked at that clinic, but they have another clinic in Marbella, Spain. And I looked at it yesterday. Man, this clinic is gorgeous. It's amazing. And the minimum you pay for like a 7-day fast was like 3,000 plus, and then up to a 30-day fast, you could pay, as I kid you not, as much as 60,000 if you want to be in like a sort of VIP sort of suite. And then they have a ton of cool stuff you can get, like body work and IV. So like you have to remember, a lot of people that go to these clinics that are like just fasting for better health and longevity, they're doing a lot of healthy behaviors, so that you have this healthy user bias. So they might already be fasting, they might be accustomed to it, they might be eating organic food already, living in a nice clean environment, and can afford better care for themselves and like body work. And in this center, then you can get body work, and they do Pilates, yoga. It's really nice. Like honestly, like I if I had like cash to burn, I'd go there just as a sanatorium type thing to just, I'll tell them, look guys, I'm coming, and I will not fast. And some people, like, you can actually go there and tell them I'll eat 800 calories a day or up to 2,000 calories a day. So I'm like, okay, I'll eat 2,000 calories for like 15 days, whatever, get a little bit shredded or whatever, and then I want to get the IV drips and the Myers cocktails and all the body work and massages and Pilates, and then go for walks in the sun on the beach. And so here's the thing, in that low stress environment, yeah, you're gonna do a little bit better, but a lot of people, the way they do it, they still work, they're trying to fast for 3 days, and they got the kids, they got their phone is blasting them, they're not eating generally well before and after. So there's a lot of things that are not dialed in, and those people are gonna do worse. So these guys here, like this sample of people that they're studying, is a really it's a little bit, again, skewing towards this healthy user bias that can plague studies, just like the unhealthy user bias can, which we won't discuss that today, but I'll have a future episode that kind of explains this a bit more. Okay, so what else? So here's the fasting protocol. So they were under daily supervision with nurses and physicians. So again, a lot of care. They're getting pampered. It's nice. So they got into the clinic. They had a standardized vegetarian dinner. Next day, the baseline period, they were given 600 calories vegetarian diet, 3 meals. And then, look, to initiate the 10-day fasting period, the intestinal tract was emptied with the intake of a laxative. Okay, so NaSO, I think that's just Epsom salts. Okay, so this is actually really good, because to clear the intestines means, because when you don't eat, you don't poop, you don't have the peristalsis moving the feces along. That can actually that the fecal material, that you can absorb some of the toxins and byproducts as it kind of sits in the gut, and that can kind of basically basically poison you in a sense, and cause inflammatory sort of reactions. So the fact that they did that is a great start to the fast, and some people don't. Okay, so if you're not doing all of these things that they're doing when you're fasting, you are, again, stacking disadvantageous factors against yourself. Then, during fasting, all subjects receive a portion of 20 grams of honey each morning, had to drink 2-3 liters of water or herbal tea. Then they had organic, freshly squeezed fruit juice, 250 mils at noon, and vegetable broth in the evening. So again, this really takes the edge off the stress. Okay, so again, if people are not doing that out there, they're just water fasting for like 5 days, they are in a much higher stress state than these people would have been, these guys. Total daily intake, caloric intake was 200 to 250 kcal per day. And look, during the fasting period, an enema was applied every other day to remove intestinal remnants and disquamated mucosal cells, which again, this really kind of helps to clear stuff out, so that, because the stress of fasting, paradoxically, people don't know, but cortisol and stress increase intestinal permeability or leaky gut. So by removing with an enema these remnants of dead stuff in there, this is another very beneficial thing that can kind of prevent inflammatory stuff happening when the bits of dead bacteria and whatever else chemicals get into the bloodstream, and the immune system kind of has to react, you know. And then food was reintroduced during 3 days, progressively from 800 to 1600 calories per day. And then here they also combined the fasting with low to moderate intensity program of physical activity with certified trainers, 1 hour gymnastics, which, you know, the thing is, maybe if I was fasting like that, I wouldn't be doing a lot of activity, because it's just additional stress. But the fact that doing things like gymnastics and whole body stretching and yoga and outdoor walks, so they're getting sun and daylight, 90-minute walk in the afternoon, again, daylight, sun. Marbella is pretty relatively clean, near the sea. I've been there a few times. Used to live in Spain, kind of near it, for a while with my parents. And so the whole body stretching and the yoga, that kind of moves lymph along, and just it's really beneficial. And again, these guys are getting pampered at the center, which, by the way, doing studies like this at that center, huge conflict of interest and a lot of bias, because I'll tell you, the center you heard was Buckinger Wilhelmi Center or whatever, and one of the lead authors of the study is Francois Wilhelmi de Toledo, okay, involved in that center, okay. So, bit of a conflict of interest, but come on, it's like, let's not be nitpicky here. So, where were we? Okay, so the clinical outcomes, so they would measure them every few days, body weight, waist circumference, blood pressure, heart rate, by a nurse. They looked at body composition. So what's interesting here, they did a baseline, of course, as you do, at a few days in and so on, during the fast and the refeed. But what's really nice that I like that they did is they did a follow-up 3 months down the line, and very few studies are doing this. And first, it's expensive, first of all. But I tell you, the reason they're not doing it is because, especially if you're doing markers like these guys, the amount of markers they did is uncharacteristic of a lot of this research. They do a lot less biomarker analysis with many of these studies I've looked at. If you actually follow these people down the line, especially if they're doing periodic fasting, not just once off, you're gonna see a lot of horrible, horrible stuff happen to these people. I guarantee you, and you'll see why in a minute. After 3 months, the follow up, what it showed, I was like, I can't believe they're glossing over all of this. They didn't. They basically glossed over the horrible stuff that happened. Okay. So let's see what else we go here. So, okay, they did stuff around physical performance, which, to be honest with me, like, again, they're looking at, again, it's muscle protein loss and kind of muscle function. So they were looking at, honestly, I don't care so much about, do you maintain your strength before and after the fast. Even if you do, I don't care. I don't care if you're just as strong at 40 years of age, 10 days after starving yourself. To me, that's not the deleterious effect. The deleterious effects happen over time, over months and years, especially when this is a chronic thing, or with like intermittent fasting, or a periodic thing with, let's say 5-day fasts every 3 months, or 7-day fasts, or 2 10-day fasts twice a year. All of that's really a terrible idea. So let's see what else. So I'm gonna spare you a lot of the details here. So so they did physical activity. We covered that. So look at this. I'm just gonna go directly to the results here. So first of all, they increased their steps during the study duration. So they actually increased their daily steps number by 60%. So by about 5,500 steps extra per day, give or take 800. To me, this is introducing a confounding variable, because this probably increases stress on them in terms of energy requirement. So they will probably burn more fat, right? But at the expense of what? Probably lean tissue. So this, if you want to do this well, I think the physical activity should remain the same. But again, they will have a very specific goal here. But I think this definitely kind of is kind of confounding the results in a way. You want to keep things as close as possible to what they were doing, and then just introduce the intervention of fasting, so that, because imagine you introduce fasting as the intervention, but also you add red light therapy and meditation and a bunch of stuff during that 10 days. So then, if the outcome is good, was it the meditation? Was it the red light therapy? Was it the massages? Whatever. So it's just introducing more physical activity, like 60% more steps a day. That's significant. I think that wasn't a good thing. But let's look at the baseline. So the baseline, like we said, 44 years plus minus 14. The weight of the subject was 85.7 kg. So just to give you the pounds, 85.7 times 2.2 is 188 pounds on average, give or take 5 pounds ish. So they weren't overweight. Like their BMI was 26.2, give or take 0.9. They weren't overweight. They weren't fat. Their fat mass was 17%, 17.5, give or take 1.7%. So they weren't like again, they were healthy. They weren't fat. They weren't overweight. They weren't old. So the thing about it is, like, these guys probably, maybe, like, they may want to lose a few pounds. We all do, as it were. We all want to be a bit leaner, I'm sure, most of us. But they didn't need to lose a ton of weight, right? Which kind of goes to the point. If you're already kind of close to your optimal weight, or let's say within 10 pounds of it, which isn't too bad to be overweight by 10 pounds. It's not the end of the world, right? That, or let's say you're close to your ideal weight within like 5 pounds. Well, in that case, fasting doesn't really make sense, right? For weight loss. So then why excuse my French, why the hell would you want to fast then? To live longer? For the autophagy? That's kind of the scam. And then if you're overweight, which we'll cover in a separate video or 2 or 5, if you're overweight and then the goal is to lose weight, I think fasting is probably one of the, not just the worst, but the most dangerous and insidious ways to screw up your health. Because you get a quick weight loss at the expense of your metabolic rate and a bunch of other horrible things happening. So if you're healthy and you don't need to lose much or any weight, fasting is stupid, because the whole autophagy and longevity thing is not true. Okay. And then if you're overweight and you have, let's say, 20 plus pounds to lose, then fasting will give you a quick result, but it'll screw you up. So who should fast of those two categories? Neither. And those are the main categories of people that will fast. And of course, you have a third category of people with pretty, serious diseases and conditions. I would posit in a separate video later on in the next weeks or month that a lot of those people, we can help them without starving them of the nutrients and the energy that they need to heal. Okay? So who should fast? Nobody should fast. That's kind of that's kind of my take here. All right, let's look at the changes in anthropometric markers. Okay, so we already covered 5.9 kg lost after 10 days. Let's look at, now this is where we're going to look at the weight. So they lost the weight. You can see on the, if you're watching, you can see, I'm going to maybe zoom in a little bit more. These graphs, that's the best quality that you will see. I can't make them bigger, and that's unfortunately the maximum size, but let me make it a little bit bigger here. Okay, so you can see here the weight goes down, and then at follow-up it only slightly increases in the, so the black here, that's the baseline measurement. The gray is the 10 days of fasting. Then the darker gray is the 3 refeed days, RF1 to 3, and then FUP is, I'm not gonna say it. You know what I'm gonna say. It's how effed up they were 3 months later. No, the FUP, the follow-up, is 3 months later. So you can see they lost the weight progressively each day. The tiny, very, very tiny amount of weight was regained during the refeed, because remember, if you remember, the refeed day was 800 calories up to 1600 calories progressively. So they were still basically on a starvation diet. So in the follow-up period, they were like significantly below their baseline weight, which I would say not a lot. So actually this is 80, this is 85. So they went from, if they lost 5 kg, 5.9 kg, they were basically like of the 6, let's say, kg, they regained like 3.5 or so. So, but the thing is, when you know you're gonna be getting followed up on, you are going to probably do healthy things. You don't want to go on a Dorito and pizza binge because oh man, I can't get fat now. I'm gonna look like a jabroni in front of these researchers. Okay. Now, I just wanted to, it was a different study. I wanted to just check something here. Okay, we'll cover this in a different video. Okay, so where the heck was I? I was just checking something. Okay, so so waist circumference basically returned to almost the same. You can see here. So they lost some waist circumference. A lot of that came back. Now, what's interesting is if you look at the systolic blood pressure and the diastolic blood pressure, it basically progressively kept getting lower, including during refeed day 1 and 2. It kept getting lower with the systolic. There was a bit more kind of variability with the diastolic, but I like to kind of, I did a workshop talking about this study and other studies for 3 hours at the Acapulco conference a couple of weeks ago. So I showed the guys and the gals that were at the workshop, and I was like, yeah, check this out. So their blood pressure keeps going down. Why? Can anyone guess why? Like, because they're slowly dying. That's why their blood pressure is lowering, right? And then at baseline, at follow-up 3 months later, it was basically at baseline. Then let's look at, this is where it starts to get interesting. So let's see. Oh, no, this is protein oxidation. I will skip this over just to save time. I'm gonna cover some of this in more detail in my upcoming book on fasting. Um, so look here. So fat mass again loss accounted for 40% of changes in total body weight, and then lean soft tissues accounted for 60%. Now, 42 of that is metabolic active tissue, which they say liver, kidneys, heart, intestine, muscles, etc. So I don't know about you, but I don't want to engage in interventions where my kidneys and my heart degenerate. That's what lean soft tissue loss means, and your liver degenerating, and your intestines degenerating. I don't want that. I want to engage in interventions where I'm building my body, my lean tissues, and maintaining them and optimizing their function. I don't want to be losing that for the sake of, again, 5 freaking pounds. 5 pounds. So imagine you're 50 pounds overweight. Okay, maybe in that case you would lose a little bit more than 40% fat mass. But from the research, and which we will cover soon, you see yourself, the research, you basically, the fat mass loss is basically around a third in a lot of studies. Okay, so maybe if you're like 50 pounds overweight, maybe you could creep up to like 40, 45%, 50% of fat mass loss, right? But there's a lot of other risks and problems with that. Okay, but so even let's say you during the 10 days you lost, let's say, instead of 5 pounds of fat, you lost 6 pounds of fat. Is 10 days of suffering going to, and getting 6 pounds weight loss, which probably the fat loss, probably some of it you will regain when you start refeeding normally, right? Is it worth all that pain and suffering when you have 4 more pounds to lose? And then remember, some of that fat will come back on, right? So is it worth it? Should we be trying to sort of do this 10-day thing or 20-day thing where you starve yourself to get this fat loss? Or should we be thinking about what caused that weight loss to begin with? Because if you just do a fast and you go back to your normal life, you're going to regain the weight. The key is always, and I will cover this in more detail in the book, of course, and so on, and I've talked about it ad nauseum, but the key is to improve the diet and eat organic food and get address nutritional deficiencies, things that the fasting regimen doesn't do. In fact, in terms of nutritional deficiencies, and if you're hypothyroid, which one of the main symptoms of hypothyroidism for many people is weight gain. If you're hypothyroid and you're deficient in nutrients, you're going to make those deficiencies worse from fasting, and then you're going to make your hypothyroidism even worse. And then you're going to destroy your metabolism, as you'll see in a second, and then you're going to make the fat regain even easier each time, right? So, it's crazy. It's crazy that people are wasting time, but I guess, look, again, there's a huge conflict of interest here. These guys have a clinic. They're getting between 3,500 euros and up to 60,000 euros for the VIPs, rich people, to be there. So they have a big business, and I know that they're helping people. Don't get me wrong. I know they're helping people, but it's not just the fasting. They're coaching them. They're working with practitioners. There's so many other things. And you could do the fast, get some drip IVs, and that could, at least ameliorate the nutritional deficiency issue, right? Because you're getting vitamins and minerals. Like, they offer those Myers cocktails and other IVs. So, again, this is not what normal people are doing. Normal people are just like, I'm not going to eat for 3 days or 5 days or 2 days. They're not thinking about, so many people aren't, about sodium loss and getting a little bit of carbohydrate to lower the stress and moving the body and the lymph. Like, it's the first time I tried to fast, I was basically on the couch all day, and then I tried to walk outside for a while. It was horrible. I felt like crap. I was like, I have to get home ASAP, got home, went back on the couch, and I didn't have energy to do anything. That was like the first time I did it. And many people they just stop eating without even thinking about, am I deficient in things? Am I going to worsen those deficiencies by not eating now for 3 days or 5 days? So, look at this. Changes in basal metabolic rate. So basal metabolic rate decreased gradually by 12% during fasting. So look at what they say here. BMR, basal metabolic rate values during refeed and follow-up remained lower than baseline values, but the difference was not significant. This is bullshit. Okay? Let me read that again. During the fasting, their basal metabolic rate dropped by 12%. They then state their basal metabolic rate values during the refeed and follow-up remained lower than baseline values, but the difference was not significant. Now, they might mean it was not statistically significant, but there's a difference between statistical significance, just some arbitrary sort of a decision they make for their numbers to line up so they can report whatever result they want. And then there's clinical significance. Okay, so let's look at figure 3 in the study. Look at the baseline. So you see here on the, I always get this mixed up, on the x-axis, you have baseline before the fast, fasting day 4, fasting day 9, refeed day 3, and follow-up. So, and then on the y-axis, you have the basal metabolic rate in terms of calories, kilocalories per 24-hour period. As you can see, at baseline, the black, their basal metabolic rate, so basically how many calories you burn at rest in 24 hours, was almost 2,000. So, almost 1,900, up to, with a variance up to, I guess, 1,950 calories. Okay. On day 4 of the fast, it had dropped to just over 1,700 calories. On day 9 of the fast, their basal metabolic rate, how many calories they burn in 24-hour period at rest, minus activity and stuff, was under 1,700 calories. Just under. On the 3rd refeed day, it was just about close to 1,700 calories. And then the follow-up 3 months later, here in the checkered last FUP value, it was, their basal metabolic rate was just, on refeed day 3, it was probably just under 1,700, and then on the follow-up 3 months later, it was just over 1,700, as you can see here. Okay. So their baseline metabolic rate was almost 1,900, and then their basal metabolic rate 3 months after the 10-day fasting intervention in the refeed period was just over 1,700. From almost 1,900, just under 1,900 calories per day, to just over 1,700 calories per day. That's 3 months later. They had not recovered. That is a huge, maybe it's not statistically significant, but that is clinically significant, I'll tell you. Because I was at, like I said, an Acapulco conference a couple of weeks back, and at just the day before the conference started, they were doing the speed networking event. And I had my book out, and I was telling people, fasting is a terrible idea. And everyone that I said it, almost everyone was like, what? Fasting is supposed to be good, no? So this one dude told him about this study and this sort of graph, and I just verbally explained it to him. And so I asked him, and he was a lay person, he wasn't like a health practitioner by any means, but he was intermittent fasting for the last couple of years. So I told him, this is what happens after a 10-day fast with a supplement of food, 60 grams of carbs. So I told him, what do you think that means if you go from just under 1,900 calories basal metabolic rate to just over 1,700 calories? What do you think that means? So he just thought for a second. He's like, well, you burn less calories. I'm like, yes, exactly. But what does that mean for you? What's the implication over the longer term? And he just thought for a little bit longer, a few seconds. He's like, you get fat. I'm like, yes, you get fat. Because if your diet remains the same, but your basal metabolic rate goes from almost 1900 calories to just over 1700 calories, well, you're burning less calories. And if you don't lower your dietary intake of food, you're gonna gain weight. But here is so that's like, okay, if weight was an issue and not wanting to get fatter is an issue, that absolutely is valid. But here's the bigger problem. The bigger, much bigger problem is, why is the metabolic rate 3 months later much lower, like this, like almost 200 calories? It's because the body is doing less things. It's because the body lowered or turned off some functions. So it's burning less calories. And what functions will it turn off? It's not going to turn off the heart or breathing or the brain will continue to work. What it's going to do is going to turn down the quote unquote the less higher priority functions, the more nice to have functions, right? So that can be hair, hair is not needed. Regeneration of certain tissues, especially like the skin, and not non-vital for survival functions, and the bones. Remember, they lost muscle mass, or they lost lean tissue, so that feeds into the lower metabolic rate. But as you can see, you're gonna build back better. They say you're gonna rebuild all that muscle and that lean tissue, but clearly they didn't, because they were burning less calories. So that's the body's response to stress. Is it lowers expenditure because it's preparing for calamitous events, famine, war. So this dude, the same dude I was talking to, he also told me, oh, by the way, over the last couple of years, my libido has been lowered. Do you know why that could be? I'm like, did it start shortly after you started intermittent fasting? And he thought about it again for a few seconds. He's like, yeah, I think so. Yeah. And then I explained to him how intermittent fasting, lowers men's testosterone by like 25% in 8 weeks. And that remains the same 12 months down the line. I'm going to cover that in a separate video coming up in the next few days or a week or two. So yeah, that explains things. And these are the long-term insidious effects that the fasting influencers, some of whom, especially the guys, are definitely on anabolics, testosterone, or maybe even like stronger synthetic stuff, are able to stave off that catabolism of the lean tissues and ameliorate the effects of cortisol and stuff like that, because they're using testosterone. It has anti-catabolic effects, right? So a lot of these shredded guys out there, especially if they're like under 40 and in their 30s or even in their 20s, they're a terrible example for what we should do as 40-plus-year-old people, especially if you're like 45 plus, especially if you're a woman, and if your job isn't to be like a health influencer where all you do all day is just like make content and look after your health, and you don't have access to all the peptides and all this other stuff, and these IV drip vitamins every week and every 2 weeks or whatever. So like, you have to remember that what works, what worked for you 20 years ago might not work now, or even 10 years ago. I'm 40 in a month. I can't do some things that I could do 10 years ago. Like I was 10 years ago, I was training Thai boxing like up to 6 and even 8 times a week. Some days I was training twice a day because I was training for a fight, and I was working a full-time job in an office. And I was, my wife now, she was my girlfriend. We had just met, so we were like, doing stuff with her, going out and having fun. And I was doing like a weekend, 1 weekend a month. I was doing a neuromuscular therapy course and sports and event massage. So doing a lot of stuff, and then I can't do that sort of regimen right now. I could not do that, and if I tried to, I will drive my health into the ground. So, and I'm sure 10 years ago or 15 years ago, I could have done easily a 2-week fast and survived it, and maybe, even said, "Oh, I feel so much. Everything was better after." But that won't be the case now, and you have to remember that the older you get, the more you have to protect yourself from stress. And if fasting was magical in some way, yeah, okay, maybe we could do it, but there's nothing magical about it. There's nothing magical about it. You're just degenerating your body to survive the stress. That is it. And you will see, if you're a new listener or viewer, you will see in the coming weeks, and if you haven't read my book, you'll see in the coming weeks I'll give you a lot more research as I kind of culminate into publishing the book. But if you're an existing listener, viewer, or a client, which many clients are listening to the podcast as well, you already know this. So you kind of already know to protect yourself. I'm just kind of, it's kind of not for you, this information, but although these nuances probably are interesting to you, to further solidify your understanding of why it's a dumb idea to fast, to starve yourself to better health. What an Orwellian thing. Let's starve ourselves to better health. Orwell would have loved to put that in his next book, 1985. I'm assuming that's what he would have called it. So, change in fitness, skeletal muscle function, and biochemical properties. So this is, I feel like they spent a lot of time here because look, their maximal grip strength, which is whatever. It's a valid marker for stuff. But look at leg strength increased on follow up here. So they seem to like be patting. They spent way too much time here. They were patting themselves on the back that there wasn't like a loss of like muscle function. I don't care 3 months later if you're just as strong, right? Because a lot of it's the nervous system. You know, you could maintain strength even with a little bit of lean tissue loss. Remember, because a lot of that lean tissue loss is the intestines, the liver, the heart, even parts of the brain. So if you're doing exercise during the fasting, after the fasting, you're giving the body a stress or a stimulus to maintain strength, okay? But at the expense of what? Other stuff. I'm sorry to belabor this point, but look again. Look at this. I'm going to like tattoo this on my forehead. This is the basal metabolic rate at the start, way up high, 1900 almost. And on follow-up 3 months later, it's just slightly higher than after the 3 days of refeeding. It's unbelievable how 1 10-day fast can do this to just wreck your metabolic rate. And I'll do another video on a study on intermittent fasting, which I covered in my book, How to Actually Live Longer, Volume 1. After 2 weeks, already the metabolic rate of the intermittent fasters was reduced. In 2 weeks, with intermittent fasting, without lowering calories. They didn't try to lower calories. So you can imagine if intermittent fasting will lower your metabolic rate in 2 weeks, a 10-day fast is going to wreck it, as you can see here. It's horrific. This is a horrific. I'm belaboring this point because this is the one thing, if you can take away here, is this is the bad thing. Because again, it's not just about burning more or less calories and gaining more fat. It's if a lower metabolic rate means less functions in the body are doing things, like less stuff is happening in the body. And that means the body down-regulated some stuff, right? That could have been useful for you. You know, hair, skin, nails, nail growth. Not that it's useful, but like generally, I during periods of less calories, eating less and more stress, I notice I'm cutting my nails a lot less often. When I'm eating more and like everything is like low stress, I notice my hair grows faster, my nails especially. That's very noticeable. So those are just nice to haves, right? But we're talking about other stuff like repair, regeneration. That requires metabolic activity. Okay, I'm belaboring the point here super hard. What else? Okay, so cardiometabolic, so changes in plasma lipids, glucose, insulin, concentration. But wait, there's more. Check this out. So, figure 5 here. I'm only going to cover 2 things. Look at the plasma glucose, okay? Their plasma glucose after the refeed was slightly higher, very slightly, than baseline. And their plasma glucose, their morning fasting glucose was actually higher 3 months later on follow-up. So all this nonsense about how fasting will improve cardiometabolic markers and risk factors, their freaking blood plasma glucose is higher 3 months later. That means on its own it doesn't necessarily mean it's they're more dysfunctional metabolically speaking. But look to the right here, graph I, the insulin, plasma insulin at baseline, and then just if you see on the refeed, it goes way low during the fast. On refeed day 3, kind of bumps up quite a lot, close to baseline, but up. This is the cruncher, kicker, whatever. This is the staggering part is 3 months down the line, their fasting insulin was way higher. And this indicates metabolic dysfunction. This indicates they're becoming more insulin resistant, less metabolically flexible, and a loss or a degradation, let's say, of glucoregulation. Okay, so this is terrible, because the whole point of the whole thing with the fasting and whatever else is it's going to improve cardiometabolic risk factors, because that's all they care in the mainstream sort of pharma-sponsored nonsense, right? They care about weight loss with the fasting and improvement in cardiometabolic risk factors for the most part. These guys kind of glossed over it because they were looking again at protein loss and things like that, muscle function and strength, right? So they didn't care about this. But I'm happy that at least they did these markers and they included them, because many studies, would you believe, they do nowhere near, not even half or a third of getting this much lab work, and it goes on. So look, changes in inflammatory markers. They say fasting lowers your inflammation, and they say, look, CRP remained unchanged during the intervention. So CRP, C-reactive protein, this is basically an inflammatory marker, non-specific, can be raised by many things. But they say the CRP remained unchanged during the intervention, and that's bullshit. Look, figure 6, A, CRP, baseline, just over 1. Fasting day 1, skyrockets, basically doubles to close to 3, up to 4 in some of the guys. Fasting day 4, still way higher, close to 2. So just over 1 day, the baseline, close to 3, or I guess 2.6 on day 1, close to 2, still higher, and only on day 9 is the CRP, acute phase reactant inflammatory marker, non-specific, is it actually lower than baseline. So during the first at least 4 days, inflammation increased, and then it was lower on the refeed day 1 and day 3, but then it was back to baseline 3 months later. And then if you look at plasma IL-6, interleukin 6, what's interesting here, baseline lower on fasting day 1, lower, a little bit lower, higher than fasting day 1, but a little bit lower than baseline on day 4, higher than baseline on day 9, and then it lowers on refeed day 1, but still higher than baseline, and then it basically is double what it was baseline on refeed day 3. So during the refeed on the 3rd day, something is causing inflammation in these men. And then there's also interferon gamma, TNF alpha, plasma MCP1, plasma interleukin 10. So not all of these markers are worsened during fasting and or on follow-up, but like the fact that they're saying CRP remained unchanged when on the freaking graph it basically doubles on day 1 and still higher on day 4 is I don't know how was this peer reviewed. Like these people are like the smartest people in the world, they're PhDs. How are they saying things like this, And then I'm gonna cover this more in the book, but like to me this is really just in your face disingenuous, right? I don't even know what to make of it. But I've seen other studies that show CRP and some inflammatory markers increasing during the fast, right? So I will explain in the book and then in future videos why that is the case or why that may be the case, because there could be multiple things that are causing this inflammation, like the degeneration and destruction of tissue and cells. That's one thing that can cause inflammatory processes. The release of the omega-6 polyunsaturated fats from the fatty tissue that's very can be very inflammatory and damaging, and then other things like chemicals and so on, which we'll cover in future videos. But it's kind of crazy. Like, oh yeah, CRP remained unchanged during the intervention. It freaking doubled here. If you're watching the video, it freaking doubled on day one and was higher. And then at follow up 3 months later, it's the same as baseline. Okay, um, so that's kind of crazy. And then another interesting figure 7. um, so look, so they say changes in satiety and appetite related regulatory hormones. I think this is significant. Circulating levels of orexigenic, i.e. ghrelin, or anorexigenic hormones, PP, PYY, and GLP-1, remained unchanged during the study. Plasma leptin concentration was reduced during fasting and refeed, and this lower level was still maintained at follow-up. Now, it seems like they think that's a good thing, but from my understanding, so you can see here figure 7a, the ghrelin is a hunger signaling hormone, so at baseline, it was about 5. Day 1 of fasting was a little bit higher, maybe 6.5. Then the ghrelin goes lower on day 4. Day 9, it's back to where it was on day 1. And then during the refeed, day 1 and day 3, it actually increases. But here's the interesting thing, and if you can't see, if you're on the podcast, so the baseline was 5. This ghrelin hunger signaling hormone makes you hungry, makes you want to eat. It was 5 in the black here. And then basically 3 months, at the 3-month follow-up, it had tripled, right? That's not a good thing. If your hunger hormone, ghrelin, hunger signaling hormone, is triple what it was at baseline, and a 10-day fast 3 months later basically increases it 3x. And then if you look here, the 7E here, plasma leptin, at baseline it was close, I guess, over 700. It plummets during the fast and then the refeed, but then at 3-month follow-up it was like 600. So it was kind of, it bumped back up quite high. So it went from 700 something to like 200, over 200, under 200, close to 100, stayed under 200 during the fasting and the refeed, but then it only climbed back to over 600 months later. So it had dropped. It was significant, quite a little lower, maybe not statistically significant, but it was lower than at baseline. And so it could be because of the loss of fat mass, right? But so leptin is more of a satiety signaling hormone that fatty tissue makes. So ghrelin triples at follow-up 3 months later. So hunger signaling hormone. And then the satiety hormone is lower. And and then don't forget that they've lost metabolically active lean tissue, and their basal metabolic rate is like close, not 200 calories, but close to 200 calories lower, more than 10%. And then look at figure 7H here. They have this some qualitative sort of questions. They ask them, how hungry do you feel? Score of 100. At baseline, they were about 50. During fasting, they didn't feel as much hunger. Day 9 of fasting, that it was higher than baseline. How hungry do you feel? This score. It increased on refeed day 1 and the refeed day 3. It was higher. And then on a 3-month follow-up, it was just slightly higher than baseline, right? So your metabolic rate is lower. You've lost muscle mass and metabolic active organs tissue. Your ghrelin, your hunger signaling hormone, has tripled. Your leptin, your satiety hormone, is a little bit lower than it was at baseline. And then you feel just as hungry, if not a little bit hungrier than before. And then how much do you think you can eat? Figure 7i. It it was basically the same as baseline on the 3-month follow-up. So again, you've lowered your metabolic rate by a lot. Maybe not statistically significant, but 200 calories a day for a man, 85 kg, 185 whatever pounds. That's significant. Ghrelin, hunger signaling hormone, increases. Leptin, slightly lower, satiety signaling hormone. Then you feel just as hungry as before. Well, like, isn't that a disaster waiting to happen? If you fall off the rails here, which maybe these guys are very health conscious, the fact that they signed up for the study and so on, maybe they won't succumb to this. And maybe if they start gaining weight, they will lower their calories, but at the expense of what? Like, you're just going to keep lowering your calories to maintain your weight and further drive yourself into hypothyroidism over the next years and decades. That's not a recipe for longevity and good health, honestly. And that is it for this. So there's little nuances here and there, but I don't think we need to cover them here. The only thing I'll just cover is the conflict of interest. So Francois Wilhelmi de Toledo is managing director of Amplius GmbH, which is one of the companies that funded the study. That it coordinates the scientific documentation for the Buchinger Wilhelmi clinics. And his name is Francois Wilhelmi de Toledo. And it says he's a co-worker of the Buchinger Wilhelmi clinic. But look, his name is Wilhelmi. And the clinic is called Buchinger Wilhelmi. So I think he's more than just a co-worker. He's like an executive here. And then Franziska Grundler is a co-worker at the Buchinger. So it's, again, I'm happy how many markers and the fact that they did a 3-month follow-up. I'm happy they did this so we can glean a little bit deeper what's happening. I'm happy they didn't omit some of these things, but I'm not happy that they glossed over some of these things. And some things were clearly like the CRP remained unchanged during intervention. Does this look like it did not change? Yes, it was lower on refeed day 1 and refeed day 3, but it was back at baseline 3 months later. But it was doubled on day 1 and still way higher on day 4. Things like that, and so you can see things around the decrease in metabolic rate that was really glossed over. That's very significant for the long term, So the conflict of interest when it's your clinic and then your company is funding it, you want to produce good results or at least report good results, the findings, so because you wanna promote fasting. So I don't think people that say, oh, if fasting became mainstream, it would put big pharma out of business, is because I don't think it's true, because the negative effects of fasting, especially with health conscious people that are on the younger end, like still in their 40s or even younger, the negative health effects from periodic fasting or intermittent fasting for a long time are gonna happen over at least months, but possibly years. And they're gonna be so slow. It's like looking at yourself in the mirror. You don't see your aging, you don't see your aging. So similarly, if you're doing this, it's gonna creep up on you so slowly. In some cases, I've seen people that have wrecked themselves with fasting as well, younger people as well, and older. But with health conscious, healthy people, men, strong men, etc., with higher socioeconomic status, which is often the kind of people that go to these clinics, it's insidious. But that's what I hate about it. What really grinds my gears is, they have a lot of ways for like that are not health conscious to wreck their health. But then with people that are health conscious, it seems like these algorithms are pushing up things that are in an insidious way harming our health. I don't think that's right. I don't think that's good. I don't think that's acceptable. So I hope that you gleaned some insights here, and I will absolutely be continuing to do more deep dives into some of these studies so that you can see what's going on, because it's all, if you just read the abstract, look at this again, and I'll wrap this up because it's been an hour. The abstract. So conclusions. If you just look at the results, look here. After transient reduction, inflammatory cytokines returned to baseline at day 10. Soft tissues were still lower than baseline values. Okay, so at least they admitted that. But like the conclusion is, a 10-day fast appears to be safe in healthy humans. It's actually in healthy humans can take more punishment. More diseased humans are gonna, in many cases, it's gonna hurt them more. And then look, protein loss occurs in early fast but decreases as ketogenesis increases. So they're basically saying it's fine, it's temporary, few days, 4 days. You're gonna enter ketogenesis and it's gonna be fine. Fasting combined with physical activity does not negatively impact muscle function. And future studies will need to confirm these first findings. So that's a very, they often say stuff like that just to kind of make sure, we're not sure. We need more research. So that's if you just read the abstract, if you're a busy doctor or practitioner, you just read the abstract, you're like, okay, well, and then you read 20 of these, that your assistant gave you, or ChatGPT, let's say, gives you a bunch of studies, and you just read the abstract, and you don't have time to dig into the nuances, you will be very much convinced that the literature supports fasting is good for health, and it's safe and effective. TM. But is it? Though? I'll let you decide. Thanks for watching, and I will see you on the next video / episode, depending on what form you are watching or listening. I think I said thanks for watching again, but it never hurts to thank you one more time. See you on the next one.